Teacher's insult unveiled, girl's Marine dad surprises everyone with incredible K9 hero entrance. Emma sank into her desk, feeling like a mere shadow fading into the painted concrete walls of Lincoln High. Each day stretched before her like a vast, impenetrable void, further echoing the harsh words of Mr. Caldwell, her history teacher. "You clearly aren't cut out for academia, Emma." Those words clenched around her chest, tightening with each inhale. How could this be her future? The world outside her window seemed vibrant, full of promise, while she stood still, frozen at the start line, grappling with the staggering expectations piled on her from both her classmates and her family. She had a learning disability, which twisted even the simplest assignments into insurmountable mountains. Often, she would stare at her notes, the jumble of letters and ideas swimming away like leaves on a swift river. The weight of the budget at home didn't lighten either. She could sense the anxious energy her parents carried, always worrying about making ends meet. More than anything, her father's sacrifices nagged at her. He deserved a daughter who could shine, who could excel. Shouldn't she be able to stand tall before her peers? Instead, she felt like a deflated balloon in a room full of bright, floating ones. Then came the assignment, an opportunity to share her family history, her chance to break through the invisible barrier separating her from the world. Emma poured her heart into the project, crafting a narrative that deserved to be seen, to be recognized. These stories of her father, a dedicated Marine, filled with bravery, of camaraderie and resilient strength, all the things she yearned to embody. "This is it," she whispered to herself as she rehearsed late into the night. She fought through waves of anxiety, rehearsing in front of a mirror, shaking off the voices that crept into her mind. The day of the presentation arrived, and her head reeled with hopes and an undercurrent of fear. As she began to speak, the spotlight of judgment felt unbearably hot. Then it happened. Mr. Caldwell's voice cut through her like a knife, mocking her stutter as she hesitated. "Just sit down, Emma. This isn't for you." The room fell silent, all eyes watching her. Eyes that once held curiosity now glimmered with scorn. Before she could crumble under the weight of his words or her own swirling doubts, the door swung open. In strode her father, adorned in his Marine Corps uniform, his loyal partner Max at his side, fur shimmering and head held high. Gasps filled the classroom as curiosity transformed the silent judgment. Emma's apprehensions were interrupted, her father's mere presence igniting a rush of something that felt like hope. Before the questions erupted, before the whispers spread, Emma locked eyes with her father. In that moment, standing beside an embodiment of courage, something shifted within her. She could feel doubt start to retreat, replaced by a warmth that dared to challenge the perception of self-worth that had haunted her for so long. "Before we continue," she heard a voice call out, almost as if in slow motion. "I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue." But the tension in Emma swelled. The eyes of her peers felt sharp, waiting. No longer was she the quiet, dismissed girl who faded into the background. This was her stage. With a shaky breath, she began anew, weaving her father's tale into the fabric of her own narrative. Each word fueled by the courage coursing from the Marine beside her as a transformative moment burst open, leaving her standing on the precipice of self-discovery. What would she say next? Would it resonate, or would the past continue to haunt her? Would those who once scorned her continue to extinguish her flame, or could this moment redefine everything? The air thickened, the room brimming with anticipation, the silence a testament to her courage. As Emma's voice gained strength, a surprising clarity emerged amidst the noise of uncertainty. She spoke of her father, his laughter echoing through the halls of her memory, the subtle imprint of courage instilled in her since childhood. She recounted tales of valor and challenges faced, stories etched in her heart that mirrored her own struggles with learning. In each sentence, she found a rhythm, a connection, as she stumbled less and let the passion for her narrative resonate. The classroom remained suspended in a moment that transcended her initial fear. Eyes, once critical, began to soften, as curiosity stitched together a shared understanding. What I learned from my dad is that everyone has their own battles to fight, some visible, some not. I have my own battle with learning, and quite frankly, it's tough, but it doesn't define me. It was a pause, not an end, but a chance. An opportunity to recognize resilience rather than shame. As the final words rolled off her tongue, a still silence enveloped the room, pregnant with an energy of just-released tension. After what felt like an eternity, thunderous applause erupted, erupting like a forgotten dam. Emma, surprised and overwhelmed, looked to her father, who nodded with pride shining like a beacon in his eyes. It was a validation she longed for, a recognition of all she had worked toward. However, Mr. Caldwell's smirk still loomed, hovering like a specter ready to cut the strings of her momentary triumph. Well, perhaps there's something in you after all, Emma. Let's not get carried away. His words dripped with condescension, an indifferent response to a breakthrough that felt monumental. But Emma sensed a shift within. This wasn't merely a fleeting triumph. It was a launch pad, a stepping stone toward something greater. In that instant, she vowed to redefine herself, not by the limitations others imposed, but by the growth she could foster within. With each day that followed, Emma committed to her education with renewed vigor. The dark, looming specter of Mr. Caldwell's words became less burdensome. Instead, they spurred her on. She resisted slipping back into shadows. Emma found solace in her father's stories, and they gathered like fuel, igniting her determination. She sought help, discovered new strategies, and learned to cope with her learning disability rather than let it define her. Outside the classroom, Emma explored new interests, joining the school's literary club, giving her a voice among fellow misfits who were also grappling with their own identities. They didn't just write stories. They shared their pain, their success, their unique journeys through myriad difficulties. Emma flourished in this supportive environment. The once quiet girl who hesitated in front of a class became a captivating storyteller eager to share her perspective. Yet the shadows still lurked. Doubt often crept back like an unwelcome guest. Each success was a reminder of the hurdles she had yet to conquer. Emma began questioning. Would she ever fully escape the limitations set by others? The academic challenges remained daunting, and the apprehensions about her future weighed heavily on her mind. One afternoon, immersed in writing, she stumbled upon an unexpected message on her writing submission platform. A teacher from a neighboring school complimented her on a poem about resilience. "Your words pierce through to the heart, Emma. I believe you have something special. Why not attend our workshop? I can help you publish." The invitation fluttered through her, igniting a spark, an opportunity she never envisioned. But it also opened a canyon of trepidation. Was she bold enough to step outside her comfort zone, challenging her anxiety yet again? The choice pressed heavily on her, a daunting crossroads where potential clashed with fear. The moment of truth had arrived. Emma knew that the time had come to face not only the challenges ahead, but also her lingering self-doubt. Would she seize this chance to emerge from the cocoon of her past insecurities into a realm of possibility? With fingers poised above her keyboard, she hesitated. The question remained. Would she rise to embrace the future that beckoned, or falter once more, weighed down by uncertainty and fear? Emma's heart raced as she stared at the blinking cursor on her screen, the starkness of its emptiness mirroring the turmoil within her thoughts. This moment felt colossal, a clash of potentiality and trepidation playing out in the silence of her room. Would she let herself be defined by the tight grip of anxiety, or would she step forward, daring to navigate the uncertain territory of ambition? Willing herself to breathe, she exhaled sharply, the tension releasing momentarily. Her mind churned through the different paths converging before her. The workshop would be a radical move. It would thrust her into unfamiliar territory, where vulnerability would be a cloak she had to wear, exposing her deepest insecurities. Yet that very leap could also shatter the chains of self-doubt that Mr. Caldwell's condescension had wrapped around her. Writing was more than just words on a page. It was a vehicle for her voice. It provided an outlet for the complexities of her identity, a mirror reflecting all her unique struggles and victories. The thought of sharing her work with someone beyond the confines of her school, a stranger who recognized value in her words, sent an electric shiver down her spine. Perhaps this was her moment. Not an escape, but an embrace of everything she'd worked hard to build. Determined, Emma placed her fingers on the keyboard and began typing. "Dear Ms. Thompson, I would love to attend the workshop." But hesitation pierced through her resolve like a needle through fabric. What if she didn't belong there? What if they saw the gap between her confidence and the competence they expected? Taking a deep breath, Emma rejected the ingrained voice of doubt and hit send with a practiced resolve, her heart pounding in response to her boldness. For the first time, she was laying down a challenge to herself, not the one imposed by others, but one woven from her own aspirations. The subsequent days blurred into a whirlwind of anticipation and anxiety. Emma threw herself into her schoolwork and the literary club, where she found camaraderie in her peers. Each meeting bubbled with laughter, discussions about narrative arcs, and shared vulnerabilities. Yet the specter of pessimism often lurked in the shadows of her mind. Every new piece of writing scrutinized by others felt like a test she could fail. After school one day, as she shared her latest poem about resilience, Emma noticed a shift in her confidence. The lines flowed with an authenticity she had previously held back from exposing. This was her essence, woven intricately into every word, a tapestry of personal truths. Encouraged by their feedback, she vowed to refine her craft. The more she practiced, the more she discovered a hidden talent, not only for storytelling, but for unearthing the emotions she once considered weaknesses. Then one evening came the email she had both anticipated and dreaded. Emma's breath hitched. Ms. Thompson had responded to her workshop application. "I'm thrilled to welcome you to our program. Let's see what we can create together." Joy surged within her, yet anxiety whispered its familiar refrain. It was real now. Her opportunity lay before her, unguarded and raw. The dichotomy between excitement and fear collided fiercely in her chest, shattering her previous notion of what she was capable of. This was no longer just about sharing her narrative. It was about transformation and stepping into her identity as an authentic storyteller. But even as her excitement mounted, another uncertainty loomed. How would Mr. Caldwell react if he found out? The thought was unsettling, a shadow that lingered at the edge of her newfound light. As Emma gazed at her reflection in the computer screen, she realized she had to confront not only her fears, but also the likelihood of future judgments. This journey was going to test her in ways she could hardly fathom, but the prospect of who she might become kept calling to her. With a surge of courage, she replied with unfiltered enthusiasm. But deep down, the question persisted. Would she be brave enough to face the world outside her own experience, enter the workshop, and confront whatever awaited her? Later, as the evening shadows lengthened around her, she mulled over the mountain that still lay ahead, where every step would demand her utmost tenacity and spirit. Emma felt vulnerable and yet more determined than ever. The next chapter of her journey was dawning, one that promised challenges worth embracing. Would she rise to the occasion and validate her worth through the storm of fear? She gripped her pen tightly, the ink promising new beginnings. The moment had come. All she had to do was leap. The days leading up to the workshop felt like a tightrope walk across the horizon of her aspirations. Emma stood at the threshold of an unfamiliar world, where her sense of belonging and competence hung delicately through weaving threads of self-doubt. She practiced her breathing, and yet the anxiety nagged at her like a persistent itch in the back of her mind. Each time she recalled Ms. Thompson's email, a flicker of excitement faded into a swell of dread. What if they found out she wasn't as talented as they presumed? What if she stumbled on her words in front of experienced writers? Each what if echoed ominously, casting a shadow on her anticipation. But this time, she vowed to confront those shadows head-on. Emma sought solace in her notebook, pouring ink onto each page as a way of battling her fears. The familiar rhythm of her pen gliding over paper created a sanctuary where anxieties dissipated, replaced with thoughts of potential narratives waiting to emerge. She crafted a story about resilience inspired by her recent experiences, a protagonist navigating through darkness, much like herself. This act of creating allowed her not only to bridge her internal conflicts, but to uncover newfound strengths. On the day of the workshop, she arrived early, the sun barely rising yet optimistic in the sky. The venue, a cozy community center, buzzed with a mix of energy and trepidation, writers chatting animatedly over coffee, their laughter punctuating the air. With each passing moment, Emma felt the weight of her doubts amplifying her heartbeat. She spotted Ms. Thompson conversing with a small group, her presence calm yet commanding, inducing a mix of admiration and fear within Emma. As the workshop commenced, Emma found herself lost in the waves of creativity washing around her. Exercises tossed her out of her comfort zone. Writing prompts where they had to draw from personal experiences stirred memories and feelings Eliza once kept tightly shut. She penned passages that felt raw and visceral, each word a foray into her cautious heart. During a sharing session, her palms grew clammy, but she fought against the tide of fear. With hesitation, she read her piece aloud, a story of isolation transformed into connection, capturing moments of vulnerability that resonated universally. The silence following her reading felt like an eternity, a consequence of her own overthinking. But then, applause erupted, an unexpected wave crashing against her prior self-consciousness. In that space of acceptance, Emma felt herself shift. Vulnerability morphed into strength. The feedback from others was both encouraging and enlightening, sparking a flame within her. Here, among fellow writers, she discovered that everyone was navigating their struggles, which gave her a sense of camaraderie she hadn't expected. For the first time, she recognized that her insecurities weren't a barrier. They were an aspect of her narrative, something she could weave into her writing. Yet, moments of clarity were often challenged by shadows. As she mingled between sessions, her thoughts flickered back to Mr. Caldwell. Would he dismiss her newfound confidence? Would her amateur venture be met with derision rather than understanding? The idea made her stomach churn. She understood that this process wasn't merely about honing her skills, but about challenging the negative voice he had planted within her. Emma decided then, she wouldn't let that voice define her. The workshop was her platform to reclaim her narrative, to confront both criticism and self-doubt alike. That evening, as she prepared to leave, she exchanged contacts with some fellow attendees, their enthusiasm contagious and encouraging. As she walked toward her car, a rush of exhilaration surged through her, for the path ahead no longer felt insurmountable. She was stepping into a chapter brimming with possibility, where her voice could echo within shared experiences, despair, and triumph. But just as relief washed over her, a gnawing question took root. How would she maintain this newfound confidence when she returned to the harsh scrutiny of her everyday life? Would she crack under the pressure of expectations? Would Mr. Caldwell's influence loom like a thundercloud over her efforts? With each step home, Emma resolved that this was merely the beginning of her journey. She felt a weight of purpose settle upon her shoulders, to not merely survive the challenges, but to confront them with unwavering determination. And there, against the horizon dipped in the colors of twilight, she pondered the question that would fuel her next step. Would she have the bravery to face not only the reactions of her peers, but the judgments that awaited her upon her return? The intensity of the unknown loomed ahead like a dense fog, daring her to pierce through it. As the days slipped by after the workshop, Emma found herself oscillating between elation and simmering anxiety. Each morning she stepped into her routine with fresh determination, yet expectation gnawed at her insides like a persistent parasite. She had tasted the thrill of shared creativity, but the reality of her daily life loomed like a dark shadow, draping itself over her newfound spirit. Returning to the classroom felt surreal. The familiar sights and sounds seemed muted, as if the world had shifted slightly and left her behind. Mr. Caldwell's usual barbed comments started playing in her mind like a haunting refrain, reminding her of her past mistakes. The thrill of writing had ignited a fire within her, yet every eager intention now felt like a gamble against that specter of judgment, waiting to pounce. Determined not to let the apprehension of criticism dampen her spirit, Emma committed to spending the evenings refining the narrative she had begun at the workshop. She crafted her protagonist with fierce determination, infusing their journey with echoes of her own battles. Words flowed onto the pages, but each time she reread her work, self-doubt crept back in. The thought of Mr. Caldwell's dismissive sneer clawed at her confidence. One late-night session turned particularly intense. The clock had long passed midnight, and shadows sprawled across her living room. As she wrestled with a particularly vexing passage, frustration surged through her. In a moment of rebellion, Emma slammed her pen down and stared at the reflection of her weary eyes in the window. Just then, she recalled the supportive faces from the workshop, each one a reflection of resilience in their own right. They interconnected in her memory, reassuring her that there was strength in vulnerability. Fueled by that recollection, she drafted a new piece, an essay about reclaiming her voice. It was a direct confrontation with her fears, personifying the judgments of her past as chilling specters that could no longer dictate her progress. The words she penned were no longer merely ink on paper. They became an anthem of defiance against the whispers of shame and insecurity. The following day, she mustered every ounce of courage to polish her essay for her writing group, a casual yet intimate assembly of fellow creative-minded individuals. Emma felt the palpable tension in the air, her heart thundering like a war drum as she prepared to share her work. She recalled Ms. Thompson's gentle encouragement that had sparked a fire in her. If it resonated with even one person, it could be a flicker of hope for many. When her turn came, Emma stood before the small group, a mixture of anticipation and apprehension churning in her stomach. As she read her essay aloud, she felt the words pulse with the very essence of her fears, triumphs, and everything in between. It was her truth laid bare, willing to confront any judgment. As silence enveloped the room post-reading, the minutes stretched, and Emma's heart danced in a wild, chaotic rhythm. Would they connect with what she'd shared, or would they judge her as harshly as she did herself? The eruption of applause shattered the stillness. The group's reaction was not just a release of tension, it was a validation that resonated deep within Emma. Intrigued by the power of vulnerability in her narrative, she realized that her fears weren't merely roadblocks, they were potential avenues for connection and empathy. Buoyed by this newfound recognition, she began to envision her next challenge, submitting her essay to a local publication. The idea sent a new rush of adrenaline coursing through her veins. Could this be the next step toward solidifying her identity as a writer? Yet, a new wave of anxiety crashed over her. What if her submission was met with silence? What would that say about her burgeoning confidence? With determination coursing through her, she opened her laptop once again, ready to face not only her internal fears but also the external challenges that awaited her. The call to take the leap felt electric, yet a flicker of doubt lingered. Emma sat before her screen, fingers hovering above the keys, poised to execute her plan, yet plagued by uncertainty. Would this be the moment she fully embraced her journey, or would it send her tumbling back into the chasm of self-doubt? The weight of that decision hung heavy as she breathed deeply, questioning if she truly had the courage to embrace her own narrative, completely unedited. As Emma stared at the blank document, the cursor blinked mockingly, an impatience mirroring her turmoil. A war waged internally. Her heart surged with the desire to share her story, yet a familiar voice echoed in her mind, laced with contempt. "What are you thinking?" The suffocating weight of doubt threatened to crush her newfound resolve. She envisioned Mr. Caldwell's eyes narrowing, his static expression ready to dissect her piece like a hawk on its prey. Biting her lip, she pushed through the paralyzing fear. This was her moment. Driven by a fierce desire to be heard, she began to type, her fingers more resolute with each keystroke. She wasn't just reclaiming her voice, she was rewriting the narrative of her life. The essay transformed as thoughts poured out, a blend of passion and vulnerability. Her protagonist, infused with her struggles, echoed her sentiments, creating a bridge between her inner turmoil and the words on the page. With each paragraph, she found herself spiraling deeper into her own thoughts, reflecting on her identity as both a writer and a person. The journey was raw, exposing the jagged edges of past pain, but in that moment, they seemed less daunting. There was something invigorating about putting those doubts into words, confronting them head-on. She could almost see those specters fade as they were captured on the screen. After hours of heart-pounding writing, the piece felt complete, a courageous endeavor that embodied not just her fears, but also her resilience. Emma read over it, allowing her emotions to settle. The initial hesitation that had gripped her began to dissolve, replaced by an empowering sense of clarity. This was more than an essay. It was a declaration of who she was becoming. Feeling buoyed by this realization, she navigated to the publication submission page, her palms clammy, her pulse racing. The official call for essays lingered in her memory, urging her to take that crucial step. What if she hit send and was met with silence? The thought threatened to unhinge her newfound confidence. But what if this was the breakthrough she had long desired? She could silence the inner critic and define her own path. What's the worst that could happen? Emma whispered to herself, a mantra laced with defiance. She clicked on the submission button and took a deep breath, releasing the tension that had coiled tightly in her chest. It was done. The moment she had tiptoed toward was now behind her, but the lingering pall of uncertainty remained. What if the response didn't align with her internal validation? The thought churned uneasily in her stomach. In the following days, the world outside continued its chaotic routine. Emma felt her senses heightened. Every small setback, a brusque comment from a colleague or a missed deadline, carried more weight. Mr. Caldwell's dismissive gaze haunted her. Color drained from her cheeks each time she remembered her identity as a writer, seemingly fluctuated with the winds of others' opinions. Determined to break this cycle, Emma sought refuge in the writing group, a gathering that had become her lifeline. Each word exchanged there had the power to reshape her perspective. This time, she arrived with a different intention. She wouldn't simply share what she had written, but would also invite feedback on the development of her plan, the potential publication, her aspirations, and the wrestling match that remained within her mind. As she prepared to speak, anticipation tingled at her fingertips, mingling with apprehension. Would they see her as she now saw herself? A writer in progress, one who was willing to stand tall despite the looming shadows? Or would their reaction send her spiraling back into the uncertainty that had tormented her? Emma's breath quickened as she faced her circle of supportive peers, unwilling to let fear eclipse this moment. The challenge ahead pulsated in the air, and she realized the stakes had risen higher than ever. The time had come to confront not only her critics, but also her own evolving identity. Emma gulped, ready to unveil not just her writing, but the vulnerable essence of her journey. Would this be her moment of truth? As Emma stood before her writing group, the familiar faces blurred into a sea of expectation and judgment. The vibrant atmosphere, once a sanctuary, now felt charged with the weight of her own self-doubt. She could feel the thrum of her heartbeat echoing in her ears, drowning out the sound of the nervous chatter around her. The words she had bared to the screen, words that had tasted of her truth and defiance, now felt fragile and exposed in this new light. So, what did everyone think of the general theme? Emma began, her voice shaky, betraying her composure. The room, filled with aspiring writers seeking solace in shared experiences, turned its attention toward her. She swallowed hard, the desire to retreat clashing with the resolve forged by her recent victory. One member, Julia, leaned forward, her expression earnest. I think your narrative is incredibly relatable. I felt the emotions pouring through. But there was a moment when it felt like you hesitated, like you didn't fully confront your fears. What's holding you back? Emma's mind raced. Julia's words echoed her own internal conflicts. The moments during her writing where she skirted around deeper truths, where she tiptoed around the raw edges instead of plunging into them. Had she done the same in her life? Even outside this room? Her cheeks flushed as she contemplated this realization. I think I was afraid of coming off as too vulnerable, she admitted, each word prying open a truth that felt stuck deep within. "Sometimes I feel like I have to hold back to protect myself, you know?" The silence that followed was palpable. Members exchanged glances, nodding, as if they recognized the struggle that lay behind her fears. Emma sensed the valley of shared experience spreading out before her, a defense against her self-imposed isolation. David, known for his straightforward critiques, finally spoke. "But vulnerability is your strength. You have to embrace it, not hide behind it. The more we see you, not just the polished version, the more we can engage." His words hung in the air, igniting a flicker of something she hadn't felt before, a burgeoning courage. Perhaps she had been so busy trying to put forth a perfect image, a facade of a competent writer, that she had overlooked the very essence of what made her voice unique. "I guess I've been trying to fit into a mold that isn't me," she confessed, her gaze dropping to the table. "And it's exhausting." The group nodded, their expressions softening. The feedback she received afterward meshed into a quilt of encouragement, reshaping Emma's perspective. She found herself jotting notes furiously, ideas bubbling to the surface, interlacing her insecurities with a newfound motivation. Each suggestion felt like a key, turning in a door she hadn't known she was trying to open. By the end of the session, Emma was not the same writer who had walked in moments ago. A commitment began to crystallize within her, the necessity of fully uncovering the complexities of her identity in her writing, no matter how uncomfortable it felt. The process was like standing on the precipice of a cliff, ready to leap, uncertain, but exhilarated by the prospect of flight. As she walked away from the group, Emma's heart beat with a sharper clarity. She felt lighter, as if the burdens she had carried were being exchanged for possibilities. Yet the residue of doubt lingered. How would Mr. Caldwell, the embodiment of her fears, react if she truly laid her soul bare in her future writings? While the ink dried on her resolve, she vowed to find out. This new chapter of her writing was one of exploration, of fearlessness, and the tenacity to be seen. The time to confront her critics, both external and internal, had now arrived. What would happen when the real Emma emerged, when the raw and unfiltered truth finally seeped into her work? The challenge loomed like an untamed storm on the horizon, and she was ready to step into it. The next week loomed before Emma like a stretched canvas, an unfurling blank page awaiting the brush of her pen. The writing group had ignited a spark, its embers glowing with the potential of her raw expression. With vivid determination, she set out to write a new piece, driven not by the fear of judgment but rather by the desire to unveil the complexities of her own truth. She found herself sitting at her desk, fingers poised above the keyboard, the ambient sounds of her apartment fading into the background. The silence felt heavier now, pregnant with possibilities. In the solitude, she questioned her former approach. No longer would she be shackled by the need for perfection. She mustered the courage to immerse herself in the emotions she had previously shelved. Memories whispered in her ear, regrettable moments, triumphs, and struggles that molded her identity. She could hear David's voice ringing in her ears. Vulnerability was her strength. Plucking from this well of memories, she began to write. Words cascaded onto the screen, spilling forth like water released from a dam. Pain, regret, hope, and laughter danced between the lines. She wrote about her father, a Marine whose stoicism often felt like an impenetrable wall. Emma dared to explore how his strength could feel both immensely supportive and, at times, suffocating. Each paragraph made her tremble with a peculiar mix of anxiety and exhilaration. This was the territory she had been too frightened to enter. As she crafted her narrative, a nagging feeling crawled beneath her skin. How would her father react to reading these intimate confessions? Would he view her exploration as a betrayal of his stoic legacy? The question lingered, provoking a visceral conflict within her. But over time, another idea emerged. Perhaps this was not merely a confession. It was an opportunity for connection, and not just with her father, but also with anyone who had ever felt the weight of expectation. Days passed, and with every keystroke, Emma's confidence grew. She filled page after page, embracing the strength gained from her vulnerability. Yet amidst the satisfaction, a shadow clung to her, Mr. Caldwell remained a specter, lurking at the edge of her mind. The very thought of submitting her writing to him, of exposing the unedited truths, sent shivers down her spine. Was she ready to face the harsh critiques that would undoubtedly follow? The moment of sharing her work with the group approached, and the anxiety returned with a vengeance. She practiced her delivery in front of the mirror, fighting against the storm of doubt swirling in her mind. This time, however, she didn't want to shrink away. She wanted to ignite a fire of discussion, to provoke thought and reflection. She visualized the faces of her peers, seen clearly through the thick fog of insecure anticipation. Each expression held the promise of connection, understanding, and perhaps even challenge. As the day of presentation arrived, Emma felt the familiar thrum of fear, but now it was tinged with a sense of excitement. Clutching her printed piece to her chest, she entered the meeting room, greeted by the warm smiles of her fellow writers. Sitting down, she glanced at her pages, contemplating the gravity of the moment. Would she be brave enough to not only read her truth, but own it in front of those who've become both her allies and her critics? With every heartbeat echoing in her ears, Emma understood that this was her moment. Not just to share her writing, but to truly step into her identity as a writer. The time had come to confront not only her fears, but also the echoes of Mr. Caldwell's criticisms that loomed in her psyche. As she took a deep breath and read the first line aloud, an overwhelming sensation uncoiled within her. This was who she was meant to be. But as the words fell from her lips, she couldn't help but wonder, how many critics would she face before the end, and were they ready for the real Emma? Each heartbeat now felt charged with possibility, the confrontation brimming just ahead. Emma's voice trembled as she finished the first paragraph, a rush of relief mixed with trepidation flooding through her. The room, filled with an expectant silence, urged her to continue, pushing her past the initial shock of daring to share her truth. Each subsequent line felt heavier yet empowering, unraveling the tightly woven threads of her insecurities. As she spoke of her father, a sense of liberation washed over her. She was no longer just a daughter beneath his shadow, but an individual untethered from fear. The reactions captivated her. Some members nodded in understanding, while others tilted their heads with a hint of curiosity, the words sparking something within them. Emma felt the energy shift, transforming her anxiety into a communal experience, a dance of vulnerability shared among artists intertwined in their struggles. As she reached the climax of her reading, her voice grew stronger, resonating with a newfound authority. In contrast to her earlier self-doubt, she now stood confronting her pain and the generational complexities of masculinity. But as she prepared to end, an unsettling question crawled to the forefront of her mind. Was all this enough? Would her journey resonate with the tight-knit group, or fade into the silence of indifference? The room erupted into applause as she concluded, but she barely registered it. Instead, her gaze found Mr. Caldwell, the self-proclaimed expert accustomed to dissecting submissions. He sat there, arms crossed, an inscrutable expression flickering across his face. Emma's heart raced, a mix of anticipation and dread colliding wildly within her. If anyone was going to expose the weakness in her narrative, it would be him. She watched as he leaned forward, resting his chin on his palm. His critique was inevitable. "Emma," he began slowly, each word measured like the sharp edge of a scalpel. "Your piece has potential, but it lacks focus. You must streamline your thoughts to make a solid impact. Personal connection is important. But have you thought about your audience?" The reprimand struck her core, the vulnerability she'd so gallantly displayed suddenly feeling fragile under the weight of his comment. It was a raw reminder of the stakes involved. She had laid her soul bare, yet a single observation threatened to unravel it all. However, as waves of doubt crashed over her, something shifted. For the first time, she felt a surge of defiance. Emma realized that while Mr. Caldwell's critique was valid, it was only one voice among many. She had shared something monumental, her journey toward authenticity, and she refused to let it shrink under the pressure of someone else's opinion. As the discussion unfolded, she nodded to the feedback from others, welcoming diverse perspectives and constructive criticism. Her heart swelled at the support that emerged, a chorus of voices echoing her sentiments, affirming her journey, and reinforcing her emerging identity as a writer. They offered insights, suggestions, and even shared their vulnerabilities, affirming the collective strength gained through individual experience. In that moment, Emma recognized her evolution. She was becoming the bridge between fear and fortitude. With each critique, she could refine her voice, not dilute it. The doubts that had once paralyzed her now felt like stepping stones toward refinement, rather than barriers. Later that evening, her computer screen flickered back to life, and a swelling determination surged within her. She was ready to revise, fueled not by a fear of judgment, but by the desire to deepen her understanding and utility in her writing. The next draft wouldn't erase her father's complexities but would amplify them, weaving tied narratives into a cohesive whole. As she typed, a thrilling thought struck her. What if she reached out to her father before finalizing her piece? A conversation where she'd invite dialogue rather than dread could be the key to unlocking an even truer narrative. Hesitation loomed. Was she ready to risk his perspective on her portrayal? The cursor blinked steadily, beckoning her to continue. Would she dare to send that first message, reaching out across their shared silence? The inkling of connection shimmered just beyond her fingertips. Emma took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. The weight of her father's potential response loomed in her mind, but she understood now that it was time to address the shadows guarding her voice. The journey toward reclaiming her narrative had evolved into a voyage of connection and authenticity, and her father held a piece of that story. With fingers trembling in anticipation, she opened a new message. Hey, Dad, I've been writing a piece about our family history and what it means to me. Can we talk? I'd love to hear your thoughts. The words felt both urgent and liberating, inviting dialogue rather than confrontation. Sending the message felt monumental, an assertion of her newfound courage. Emma braced herself for the possibility of his reply, while simultaneously understanding it didn't matter if he wasn't ready to share in her narrative. This was about her reclamation of self, a step toward bridging the gap that once felt insurmountable. Days rolled by, and Emma persisted with her revisions. She honed her narrative, weaving together threads of vulnerability, resilience, and familial complexities. Each rework built upon the foundation she had established in the workshop, and from the supportive feedback of her peers, transforming self-doubt into an arena of growth. Finally, one evening as she polished her piece, her phone buzzed, her father's name lighting up the screen. With a flutter of nerves, she opened the message. Of course, Emma. I'd love to hear what you've written. Let's meet this weekend. Relief washed over her, a soft warmth igniting her spirit. This was the moment she hoped for, a chance to share her truth and to understand his perspective, facilitating a dialogue about identity and expressions she was still uncovering. When the weekend arrived, they met at their favorite cafe, a place that had been a backdrop to countless conversations over her childhood. As they settled into the cozy booth, Emma's heart raced. She took a moment to absorb the sight of her father, the stoic Marine adorned in his uniform, softened by the familiarity of shared memories. She knew that this encounter held the potential for transformation. Dad, she began, the words catching in her throat. I've been writing about my experiences, about you, and what your service means to me. I want to share it with you. She paused, gauging his reaction. His warm gaze met hers, encouraging and supportive. I'd love to hear it, Em, he replied softly, his demeanor inviting rather than imposing. Emma unrolled the printed pages, her pulse quickening. She began to read, pouring life into her words as she spoke of valor and vulnerability, linking their lives not only through his experiences, but also through her own battles, the stuttering voice confronting those who had overlooked her potential. There was a moment of silence when she finished, and Emma dared to look into his eyes. Her father remained still, his expression a mixture of pride and reflection. Finally, he broke the silence. I never knew you saw things in that light, Emma. I wish I could have helped you carry that weight. Tears prickled at her eyes as she responded, her voice steady despite the emotion flooding her words. It's not your fault, Dad. I've come to realize that strength can sometimes feel like pressure. Your service has inspired me, but I'm learning to carve out my own identity and my own path too." Her father nodded, the weight of his experiences intermingling with the nuances of her own journey. The air between them felt charged with possibilities, an awareness of struggles intermixed with shared strength. "I'm proud of you for finding your voice, Emma," he said, reinforced by an undertow of vulnerability. "Just know whatever you write, I'm here for you." In that exchange, Emma felt the chains of her earlier fears dissolve, replaced by something more profound. An understanding of her father as a man with his own complexities, the man whose shadows could now illuminate her path. That day, as they shared laughter and tears, the knowledge that both she and her dad were on a journey softened their hearts. Emma had achieved more than she had set out to do. She had transformed fear into courage, unlocking essential connections not just on the page but within her own family. Returning home, Emma sat down at her desk with renewed focus. She finished revising her essay, incorporating the reflections from her father's insights, melding the threads of their lives into a cohesive expression of empathy and understanding. With each keystroke, she affirmed her identity, not merely as a daughter or a student, but as a writer, unafraid to navigate the complex landscape of her truth. Submitting her essay felt like a triumph. She was not just shipping off words, but offering a piece of her heart that resonated with the struggles of many. She validated herself through that submission, knowing that her journey would continue beyond any critique while solidifying her place in the world as both a daughter and a storyteller. In the days that followed, Emma emerged with a strong sense of self, adept at processing her fear of judgment while celebrating her voice. The specter of Mr. Caldwell faded. He would no longer be the ultimate judge of her worth. Emma's confident stride was evident within the classroom and beyond, and her peers began to see her transformation. The quiet girl who once melted into the background now held herself with solid confidence, sharing her stories that had power and authenticity. As she stepped into her role as a storyteller, Emma knew this was only the beginning, a foundation set for future challenges and triumphs. Opportunities unfolded like petals from a blooming flower, each invitation a call to explore, connect, and express. With her father's words echoing in her mind, she embraced the limitless potential of her own narrative, unwilling to be defined by others. Emma had come full circle. She was not merely the girl who struggled in shadows, but a young woman stepping boldly into the light of her own story. This was her achievement, a profound realization. She held the pen, and the narrative of her life belonged to her alone. You need to subscribe now to this channel, as a commitment to following Emma's journey alongside all other exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and support voices that matter in narratives of growth. Comment your reactions and theories about Emma's transformation. Share the insights you gleaned from her courageous journey. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion and reflect positively on their own stories. Don't wait even one more second to share.